Welcome to Mystery and Enchanted Stories. In the ancient world, when gods ruled from the heights of Olympus, none were more feared or revered on the battlefield than Ares, the mighty god of war. His name was whispered with both awe and dread, for wherever Ares walked, war followed. He was the embodiment of bloodlust, chaos, and the savage glory of combat. No one knew mercy in his presence, for Ares thrived on the fury of men and gods alike. One day, a great war broke out between two powerful cities, Argos and Sparta. Their conflict had been simmering for years, but the moment came when both kings, desperate to claim ultimate victory, called upon the gods for favor. The air itself seemed to hum with tension as the battle began to rage. Blood stained the earth, and the cries of dying men echoed across the plains. Ares, hearing the call of battle, descended from Olympus in a storm of fire and steel. His eyes burned with fury, and his spear gleamed with the light of 1,000 slain warriors. The sight of him caused men to falter, for they knew that no mortal could stand against him. He roared, his voice carrying across the battlefield like thunder, and with every step he took, the earth quaked beneath him. But this war was not destined to go as Ares had planned, for in the midst of the carnage stood a single warrior, a man named Castor. Castor was no ordinary soldier. He was known across the land as a fearless fighter, someone who had never tasted defeat. His armor was battered, but his spirit was unbroken. He had heard the tales of Ares, the god who reveled in slaughter, but Castor had sworn an oath. He would defend his city and his people, even if it meant standing against the gods themselves. As Ares descended onto the battlefield, the earth beneath his feet cracked and smoldered. His armor, blackened and scarred from countless wars, glistened in the sunlight like the scales of a serpent. His helmet, adorned with a blood-red plume, cast shadows across his face, revealing eyes that blazed with the fury of 1,000 battles. In one hand, he wielded a massive spear, the weapon that had claimed the lives of kings and heroes alike. In the other, a sword so sharp it was said to cut through air itself. Castor, standing among the retreating ranks of warriors, watched the god approach. Though every instinct screamed at him to flee, he stood his ground. The air around him seemed to hum with tension, and the weight of Ares' presence pressed down on his shoulders. But Castor's heart, hardened by years of war and loss, refused to yield. The moment the god's eyes locked on Castor, Ares sneered, sensing defiance in this mortal, a challenge. He strode forward, his spear striking the ground with every step, sending tremors across the field. Castor, gripping his own spear, knew this would not be a battle of brute strength alone. It would be a test of endurance, intelligence, and sheer will. With a deafening roar, Ares lunged, his spear moving faster than any mortal eye could track. Castor dodged to the side, feeling the wind from the weapon as it sliced through the air where he had stood. The ground where Ares' spear struck exploded, sending dirt and debris flying. Castor rolled, regaining his footing just in time to deflect a follow-up strike with his shield. The impact rattled his bones, and he staggered back, his arms trembling from the force. "You're fast for a mortal," Ares growled, his voice echoing like distant thunder. "But speed alone won't save you." Castor steadied his breathing, keeping his shield raised as he studied Ares' movements. The god fought with an overwhelming, relentless aggression. Each strike was intended to crush, to overwhelm. But Castor knew that rage made warriors careless, and that was Ares' weakness. If he could survive the onslaught, if he could outlast the god's fury, there might be a chance. Ares swung his sword in a wide arc, aiming to cleave Castor in two. Castor ducked under the blade and thrust his spear toward Ares' side, but the god was quick. He knocked the spear aside with a contemptuous flick of his wrist and swung down again. Castor rolled backward, narrowly avoiding the strike that left a deep gash in the earth where he had just been. The two circled each other, dust rising around them as the battle raged on in the distance. Castor knew he couldn't win in a direct confrontation, but he also knew Ares would grow more frustrated the longer the fight dragged on. "You mortals never learn," Ares taunted, his lip curling in disgust. All of you think you can stand against the gods, and yet every one of you falls. Your cities burn, your people perish, and still, you challenge me. Castor's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his eyes focused, his breathing controlled. He couldn't let Ares' words break his concentration. Instead, he decided to strike at Ares' pride, testing his temper. Is this all the god of war can do? Castor shouted, his voice defiant. You claim to be invincible, but all I see is a brute with no control, swinging wildly like a beast. Is this what the gods have come to? Ares' face darkened with rage, and his next attack was reckless, driven by anger. He charged at Castor with renewed fury, bringing his sword down with both hands in a vicious overhand strike. Castor sidestepped just in time, and with a swift movement, he drove his spear into the exposed flesh of Ares' leg. The spear pierced through, and Ares let out a roar that shook the battlefield. He stumbled back, his hand instinctively clutching at the wound, red blood flowing freely. It was a small injury for a god, but it was enough to shock him, enough to make him realize he was not invulnerable. Castor knew he had only seconds before Ares recovered. He pressed the advantage, striking at the god with a flurry of blows, using his agility to keep out of range of Ares' powerful but slower swings. Each strike was aimed at the weak points in Ares' armor, the joints, the gaps between plates. Castor's spear bit into Ares' arms, his shoulders, and his side, drawing blood again and again. But Ares, enraged beyond reason, fought back with terrifying strength. His sword clanged against Castor's shield, each blow sending shockwaves through his body. Castor's shield began to splinter, and with a final, brutal strike, Ares shattered it completely, sending shards of wood and metal flying. With his shield destroyed, Castor was forced to rely on his speed alone. He ducked under another wide swing, but Ares was ready this time. The god lashed out with a backhanded strike, catching Castor across the chest. The force sent him flying, his body skidding across the ground. Dazed and gasping for air, Castor struggled to his feet. Blood dripped from the corner of his mouth, and his vision blurred from the impact. Ares loomed over him, towering like an unstoppable storm. You fought well, mortal, Ares growled, his voice cold and menacing. But this is the end. As Ares raised his sword for the final blow, the sky suddenly darkened. A cold wind swept across the battlefield, and a voice, clear and commanding, rang out. Enough, Ares. It was Athena. The goddess of wisdom and war strategy appeared, her armor glowing with ethereal light, her spear and shield in hand. She stood between Ares and Castor, her expression calm but unyielding. You have disgraced yourself, she said, her eyes locking onto Ares. This is not a war of honor, but a slaughter. Castor has proven himself, and you will not take his life. Ares, still consumed by his bloodlust, snarled but did not strike. He knew better than to challenge Athena directly, especially in matters of wisdom and justice. He defied me. Ares spat, his voice filled with bitterness. No mortal should live after standing against a god. And yet, here he stands, Athena replied, her voice firm. Because he fought with courage, not recklessness. With heart, not hatred. That is why you lost, Ares. You allowed your rage to blind you. Ares seethed, but he knew he could not argue against Athena's logic. With a final, hateful glare at Castor, he vanished in a storm of flame, returning to Olympus in defeat. Castor, barely able to stand, looked up at Athena, gratitude in his eyes. Thank you, he gasped. Athena smiled softly, helping him to his feet. You fought well, Castor. A mortal has never wounded Ares before. You have earned your place in the halls of legend. With those words, Athena vanished as well, leaving Castor standing alone on the battlefield, victorious against the god of war. His name would be sung in songs for generations, the man who dared to challenge Ares and survived. The war between Argos and Sparta was over, the bloodshed halted by the bravery of one man who dared to defy a god. Castor returned to his city, hailed as a hero, his name forever etched into the history of his people. And though Ares' shadow would always loom over the world, Castor's legacy remained. A reminder that even in the face of divine power, the strength of the human spirit could never be crushed. Thanks for joining me on this journey through captivating tales and vivid imaginations. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more stories that touch your heart and ignite your mind. Until next time, keep dreaming, stay inspired, and remember, the next story might just reveal a secret you've been searching for.